People love beauty. They just do. That's something that I think brings them to the environment and to conservation.
Near the border of Lebanon and Lancaster counties, in central Pennsylvania, lies a small gem of a habitat that attracts wildlife and people alike.
The big deal about Middle Creek is that it's really brought the people together around one piece of wildlife. And here in Middle Creek, the people have recognized how important one particular species or one event, really, it can be bird watching, it can be walking, but it's all around the Tundra swan and Middle Creek as a magnet, really, for attracting people to come together.
Every spring, the Middle Creek Wildlife Management Area becomes a temporary home to thousands of migrating birds as they begin their trip to their northern breeding grounds. Among the most anticipated visitors is the Tundra swan. Some years, a few hundred swans may spend the winter at Middle Creek, but when migration from their more southerly wintering grounds begins, thousands may appear. Nearly 25% of the eastern population of tundra swans may pass through the Middle Creek area during migration.
Snow geese tend to travel in very large, very vocal flocks. Swans less so, much smaller flocks. Basically all white plumage, but in the case of the snow goose, black wingtips. So basically all white birds, but if you see black wingtips, you're looking at a snow goose. If it's all white with a long neck and a pretty melodious call, that's a tundra swan.
On the way from their wintering grounds on the lower Chesapeake Bay and to North Carolina, the swans stop to rest and refuel for their long journey to Canada and the North Slope of Alaska.
The amazing thing about tundra swans is their migration. They spend a good portion of their life on migration. So twice a year, 4,000 miles.
For their nutritional needs, the swans depend on Middle Creek's surrounding farmlands.
Their feeding behavior and their lower overall numbers lessen the impacts on crops. And a swan feeding on waste grain in a harvested cornfield is actually a benefit in that they're eliminating that grain that will perhaps sprout on its own where they don't want it to the following spring.
We have a lot of tundra swans that winter in Pennsylvania. It's also a major spring staging area. It's sort of the first stop as these birds are going 3,000 or 4,000 miles north to their breeding grounds in the Arctic. And when they get up to the Arctic, they need to have the nutrient reserves already in place to start nesting because spring is so late up there. So they need to be picking up nutrients the whole way from Pennsylvania up through the Great Lakes, the prairies, and all the way up into the Arctic. So each one of those stops, it's really important that the swans be able to have access to those high quality feeding areas. We feel like most of the roosting areas are pretty well protected and secure. We don't have to worry too much about that status. But the farmland is excellent for producing crops, but a lot of people also look at it as being good for development, whether that's houses or industry, whatever. But when those fields are built on and paved over and turned into housing developments, the food source goes away and then that habitat's lost to the swans. And eventually, if enough of that habitat is lost, either the birds will not be able to use the area anymore, or they'll be so packed into the remaining small tracts of habitat that they'll have to expend extra energy, and in the long term it could pose a problem for the population.
For their nutritional needs, the swans depend on Middle Creek's surrounding farmlands. The agricultural areas around Middle Creek are of vital importance to swans and other waterfowl. However, development pressures are real, and residential development threatens the area.
There was a number of organizations that are trying to preserve farmland, and we can tie wildlife in with that because it's part of their habitat as well. We can do something locally conserving these farmlands that will have a positive impact on the tundra swans over their entire range. And even though they spend over 40% of their life in migration, and they may not spend a lot of time at any one point along that migratory route, but each of those areas where they stop is critical, and Middle Creek has been identified as one of those critical areas.
In addition to the interest from groups like Audubon Pennsylvania and Ducks Unlimited, another organization concerned with the sustainability of wildlife areas like Middle Creek is the Pennsylvania Highlands Coalition.
Yeah, the PA Highlands is a coalition of organizations that have identified the Highlands region as an area from western Connecticut down through New York, New Jersey, and into southeastern Pennsylvania. Middle Creek falls within the southern end of that Highlands region, and so the interest of that group in preserving area in this part of southeastern Pennsylvania is one of their priorities as well.
The invasion of the built environment into the natural environment is taking its toll on open space. The preservation of the agricultural landscapes in areas around Middle Creek for wildlife like the tundra swan is also important to many other interests, including sportsmen.
There is less and less land on the landscape for birds to use. Vast majority of the people that come to support us, which is over 700,000, probably 60% of those folks actually hunt and fish. But it's the volunteers that are part of the process. Those are probably 98% hunters. For us, it's a matter of legacy. It's very important from our sense when we look at places like Middle Creek as an area that's very important to waterfowl, created by the Game Commission, funded by private individuals, hunters, fishermen, trappers.
Each spring, as the ice starts to thaw off the lake, the swans begin their journey northward. Melting ice means open water, where the birds can more easily land and take flight. A melting snowpack allows the swans to feed on waste grains and winter wheat and nearby farm fields.
What we've begun to realize, though, through our research, especially with tundra swans, is that while their roost area, Middle Creek itself, may be secure and protected, some of the surrounding landscape may not be.
One possible solution is acquiring agricultural conservation easements. Conservation easements are one of the most powerful, effective tools available for the permanent conservation of private lands.
An easement is a legal agreement between a landowner and either a land trust like the Lebanon Valley Conservancy or a government agency like the county, and it puts a deed restriction on the property to limit how it can be developed in the future.
This gives the farmer a financial reward and preserves the land in an agricultural use.
Say you have a farm and you want to ensure that it's preserved for future generations. I mean, fertile farmland's not going to do anybody any good, not your kids, not my kids, not anybody's kids, if it's covered by a subdivision or a strip mall or a parking lot. If you put an easement on that property, it will limit future development in a way that you as a landowner get to define. So as a landowner, you still own the property, you still have tremendous control over how that property is utilized, but the restrictions you place on it are permanent.
I have seen a lot of good farms being developed, and it's not that I oppose areas being developed, but I feel there's a lot of less fertile land in the area that could be developed.
Easements are tremendously flexible. You can set up that easement so that the farm is continued to be farmed. You can set it up so that, in the future, if you need additional outbuildings or barns or ag structures, you can put those in. On the other hand, if you have, important wildlife habitat and you want to set that aside so it can't be touched for anything, you can do that too.
So by doing this, we can protect the migratory routes of the tundra swans, and we can also at the same time protect the interests of farmers who can continue farming more easily because they have that land protected. Zoning laws can change, boards of supervisors and other government agencies can change, and by putting an easement, it's more of a permanent thing than just having zoning in place for that.
There's interest in the agricultural community, but more funding is needed to protect key farms in the Middle Creek area.
We had a hearing at the farm show in Harrisburg, and I had a dairy farmer from Dauphin County, and I asked him, what's the greatest challenge that you face? And one would expect him to say energy cost, healthcare cost, low commodity cost. He said houses. I mean, development was the thing that he worried about the most, taking away his ability to be productive.
Following the flocks of migrating birds are the bird watchers, tourists, and photographers. Some people travel for hours to witness this theater of nature.
They're a tremendous tourism draw. We get a lot of people here at Middle Creek. They're coming to view the swans, and of course they're spending money locally for food and lodging and gas and so forth.
Tourism is Pennsylvania's second largest industry, second only to agriculture.
It's all positive economic development in rural America, which of course is what we care deeply about.
The Lebanon Valley Conservancy, County Conservation District, County Planning, Pennsylvania Game Commission, and others have joined forces as the Middle Creek Initiative to expand the conservation of agriculture and open space in Lebanon County and elicit support from the public and other organizations.
The fact that you have conservation practices in place has a great environmental impact. I mean, no one wants to be a better steward of the land than farmers.
We can help farmers to keep them farming because they'll get either tax benefits or income from the sale or donation of an easement.
What I would ask someone who would come here to see the swans when they're here passing through in migration is to pause for a moment and ask yourself, why is it important that we preserve private farmland 5 miles from here where they're observing the birds? Point is that private farmland 5 miles from here is where these birds feed. And if they lose those areas for foraging, there'll be no reason for them to be here at all.
With the pressures of development growing quickly, we must act now before it is too late. With unchecked sprawl, we could see a future where the skies over Middle Creek no longer echo with the calls of migrating birds, and that would be a loss for the entire community. Help preserve our heritage. Ask about easements or donate to the Lebanon Valley Conservancy today.
Whether it be actual donations or whether it be donating your time, your energy, and your efforts towards this, we're all in this together.
The Tundra swan. I mean, it is a magnificent bird. It is the essence of wilderness, and that is something worth preserving.